I'm a 29-year-old woman, and this story begins long before I had the words to describe what was happening. My sister Sophia is just 14 months younger than me, but it always felt like we lived in different worlds. She was magnetic from the start, loud, charismatic, and always the center of attention, whether she earned it or not. I was the quiet one, the reader, the one who teachers liked. But classmates forgot. Our parents weren't the type to pick favorites out loud. They were more the avoid every conflict kind of parents. So when Sophia started making jokes at my expense, their go-to response was to brush it off. When she called me names or mimicked the way I walked, they'd chuckle awkwardly and suggest I grow a thicker skin. That became the running theme of my childhood. Middle school was when things got noticeably worse. Sophia started joking about my clothes, my acne, my weight, anything that got a laugh. There was one day I'll never forget. I had a period stain on the back of my jeans during lunch. Sophia saw it before I did. She didn't whisper it to me or offer a jacket. She pointed it out to the whole table with a dramatic gasp and a fake gag. I ran to the nurse's office in tears while she stayed behind to soak in the laughter. By high school, she had fully committed to the role of the sharp-tongued queen bee. I was the reliable target, the safe one to humiliate. If I answered a question right in class, she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "Show off." If I tried to wear something trendy, she'd ask loud enough for others to hear if I had dressed in the dark, which she hosted often. She'd make sure to tell anyone who asked that I wasn't coming because she's too busy studying the dictionary. She once saw a picture of me with a friend and commented in front of our cousins, "Wow. Guess even she gets to have one friend." Lucky him. I remember the way everyone laughed, even though it wasn't that funny. That's how Sophia worked. She said whatever crossed her mind and people laughed because they didn't want to be her next target. She had a boyfriend by 9th grade. I didn't even hold hands with anyone until college. Sophia went to prom with a senior. I stayed home and watched reruns. Our parents never saw any of this as an issue. They treated it like normal sibling teasing. Even when I made the honor society and Sophia announced, guess they needed to meet their nerd quota, my parents just sighed and said, "That's just Sophia." When I got into an out-of-state college, I didn't cry at the airport. I felt like I could finally breathe. I started figuring out who I was without the constant commentary. I met people who liked me for being thoughtful, who didn't think being quiet was a flaw. I joined a few clubs, found friends who never rolled their eyes when I talked. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't as invisible as Sophia made me believe. In my final year, I met Ethan. He was in a sociology class I almost dropped, but stayed in because the professor seemed interesting. Ethan was calm, sharp, and had a dry sense of humor. He didn't interrupt people. He didn't raise his voice to be heard. He actually listened. We started dating slowly. I told him early on that I had a complicated relationship with my sister. I don't know what he expected, but I don't think anything could have prepared him. After graduation, I brought Ethan home for a family weekend. Sophia had moved back in after finishing school and was the first to meet him. She looked him up and down and asked if he was the charity case. When we sat down for dinner, she made a joke about how amazing it was that someone this normal would be into our little Hermione. My dad laughed, then looked at me and said, "Don't be so serious." Ethan didn't laugh. He stayed polite, but cold. After dessert, he pulled Sophia aside and told her something along the lines of, "If you have to insult your sister to be interesting, maybe you're not." I didn't hear it firsthand, but Sophia didn't say much after that, at least not to him. To me, nothing changed. She still made comments, just more subtle ones. Instead of loud insults. She'd whisper observations under her breath, then glance at me to see if I heard. She started excluding me from casual hangouts with our cousins. She'd host family game nights and tell me last minute or not at all. When Ethan and I got engaged 2 years later, I didn't think much of Sophia's reaction. She made a joke, something about miracles and pigs flying. I rolled my eyes. Like always, I didn't see it for what it was. Not the same old teasing, but the start of something entirely different. Because once Ethan gave me a ring, Sophia didn't just see me as her awkward older sister anymore. She saw me as a threat to her favorite identity. The one where she was always the star and I was always the sidekick. And she was about to turn my wedding interstage. When Ethan and I shared our engagement with the family, Sophia's first reaction was to raise her eyebrows and say, "Wow, miracles really do happen." I got a few laughs from my uncle and cousins, but Ethan's expression stayed flat. She asked if she could help plan the wedding. I didn't want another scene, so I said yes, but deep down I knew it was going to be a problem. Within a week, she added herself as an admin to the bridesmaid group chat. She renamed it Operation Classy or Cringe and began throwing subtle shade about my ideas. Every message came wrapped sarcasm in. When I posted a color palette, she sent a gif of clowns. When someone complimented the dress design I chose for bridesmaids, she responded with bold choice. Very summer barbecue chic. I tried addressing it privately. I sent her a calm message asking if she could keep things respectful. Her reply was short: "If you're this sensitive now, how are you going to survive marriage?" She left it at that and didn't slow down. At the engagement party, she walked in 40 minutes late wearing a white jumpsuit and a smirk. When someone asked her why she was dressed like the bride, she laughed and said, "I didn't get the memo." Ethan pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to say something, but I told him not to. I didn't want to give her more power by reacting. A few days later, my bridal shower was held at my aunt's place. Sophia brought a giant box wrapped in glitter paper. Everyone expected something sentimental or personal. When I opened it, it was lingerie. Bright red, lacy, and over the top. Sophia grinned as everyone looked uncomfortable, then said, "You're gonna need all the help you can get." That night, she posted a story on Instagram with a photo of the gift and a tag to both Ethan and me with the caption, "Poor guy." That's when I drew a line. I removed her from our wedding boards, blocked her from seeing future planning posts, and told the rest of the bridesmaids that she was no longer in charge of anything. A few hours later, she called me nonstop. I didn't answer. The next family dinner was already planned for the weekend, so I went, knowing it might be tense. As soon as I walked into the dining room, she was already seated, holding a glass of wine and grinning. Midway through the meal, she got up and followed me to the kitchen. She asked if I was really so fragile that I couldn't handle a little joke. I didn't respond. She crossed her arms, then muttered loud enough for my cousin to hear, "You're just mad because people like me more." After dinner, I told her she could attend the wedding as a guest, but she would no longer be the maid of honor. Her chair screeched against the floor as she stood and walked out without another word. By midnight, our parents had received a 3-paragraph email from Sophia saying I had turned Ethan again, that I was cutting her out of my life over a few harmless jokes, and that she feared I was becoming emotionally abusive. The next morning, my father forwarded me the email with a question mark. I didn't reply. I opened a folder on my desktop and created a new document titled Sophia Incidents. I listed every interaction, every screenshot, and every uncomfortable moment since the engagement. Ethan agreed it was time to document everything. She didn't stop. 2 days later, she added a memory to her Instagram stories from our high school prom. The photo was of her in a gown, with me blurry in the background. Mid-blink, the caption, "Some of us always knew how to shine." She followed that with another story, a boomerang of champagne glasses clinking with a caption, "Being around basic brides builds character." I told my wedding planner to remove her name from all vendor correspondence. I didn't trust her to keep boundaries anymore. The following week, the cake vendor called to confirm a new design change they'd received via email. I had made no such change. When they forwarded me the email, it was from Sophia's old Gmail, the one she used for her college blog. I sent a correction immediately and added a password for all decisions. That weekend, Ethan overheard Sophia asking one of our cousins if he was still pretending to be into the quiet type of that was the last straw for him. He sent a group message to both families saying we were scaling back the guest list and finalizing things on our own. My mother called and said Sophia was crying, but she felt like she was losing her only sister. I asked her if she had ever told Sophia to stop. She went quiet. The week ended with a package at our door. Inside was a wedding magazine, a flyer for a couples counseling retreat, and a sticky note, just in case. No name, but the handwriting was Sophia's. I took a photo and added it to the file. The next day, I started calling attorneys. Not for anything formal yet, but I wanted to know my rights if things went further. Something in Sophia had shifted. This wasn't teasing anymore. It was sabotage, and I was done waiting for her to stop. After I removed Sophia as my maid of honor, she didn't back off. She changed tactics. The next week, I got a call from my college roommate, one of my bridesmaids, saying she was dropping out of the wedding. She said she felt like things were getting toxic and that maybe I needed space. When I asked what changed, she got quiet and mentioned Sophia had reached out. I didn't press, but it didn't take long to figure out what had happened. Another bridesmaid sent me screenshots of a group chat Sophia had created. She'd added 2 of my bridesmaids and named it Behind the Veil. In it, she shared unflattering photos of me from high school, made jokes about my body, my hair, and even mocked Ethan's, and writing on our invitation cards, she captioned one photo she peeked at spelling bees. That same bridesmaid left the group chat after she saw a meme Sophia made using a photo from my freshman year dorm. She sent me the screenshots and apologized. A few days later, Sophia RSVP'd to the wedding. She marked herself down as 3. I checked the names. 2 of her college friends I had never met, and one of them had a history of causing drama at parties. I tried calling her. No answer. Ethan sent her a short formal message stating that additional guests were not permitted and would not be admitted. Her response? A public story tagging her friends that read, "Can't wait to turn this snooze fest into a night to remember." Then came the TikTok 2 weeks before the wedding. She uploaded a video titled "How to Ruin a Bride's Day in 3 Steps." She didn't mention my name, but the clips were obvious. She used old childhood photos, some of which were only stored in our family albums, and matched them with voiceovers mocking control freaks who think a ring makes them royalty. She zoomed in on a photo of me holding a spelling bee trophy and added text that said "Step 1, remind her she was always a side character." It racked up views quickly. Friends and coworkers sent me links to it before I even saw it. That night, I removed her from the guest list entirely. I contacted the venue and gave them her full name, photo, and the names of her guests. I didn't want any disruption. I emailed my parents and let them know. Within hours they called and asked if I could just let her attend quietly. I said no. Ethan backed me up fully and reminded me this was supposed to be our day. Sophia, of course, didn't let it go. She sent me an email 2 days later with the subject line "Final Offer." Inside was a list of what she called her terms for reconciliation. It included me publicly apologizing for abandoning her, giving her back her bridesmaid role, and allowing her to give a toast at the reception. I didn't respond. At first, it seemed like silence would be her retreat, a temporary lull after being officially removed from the guest list, but Sophia was never the type to stay quiet when the spotlight faded. She just found new ways to make noise. The TikTok was only the beginning. She followed it with fake tweets, stories on private Instagram accounts I was no longer allowed to see, but friends still screenshotted and sent me. Things like some people mistake control for confidence, or when they rewrite history to make themselves the hero, remember who was always there. None of them used my name, but the implication was so transparent that even family started reaching out asking what was going on. One cousin called and told me Sophia had reached out late at night crying, saying she felt betrayed, abandoned, like she was being punished for being louder. I didn't answer. I didn't feel like justifying anything anymore. I just thanked her for the heads up and hung up, then added the date to my document. The screenshots folder grew by the hour. She'd created a blog, something she'd done in college that flopped, and began writing entries again, this time about sisterhood and emotional abuse masked as introversion, about how people with quiet superiority complexes could be just as toxic as narcissists. Her followers were mostly friends from college, old acquaintances, but the comments were filled with support, people telling her she was strong, brave for speaking up, that people like that always show their true colors eventually. The irony was breathtaking. I felt myself spiraling some days, not because I believed what she was saying, but because she had always been so good at sounding believable. Sophia had a gift, not for truth, but for performance. She could take any moment, any event, and recast it so that she was always the misunderstood protagonist, the firecracker with too much heart. Meanwhile, I was still the one trying to play by the rules, trying not to feed the fire, trying to avoid giving her what she wanted, a public scene. But then she started reaching out to vendors again. The photographer sent an email asking to confirm the shot list changes Sophia had provided. I had never given her access. I double-checked every list, every login. She had fake credentials using an older email address and signed off as my wedding coordinator. I spent hours fixing the mess, locking down everything behind new passwords, sending formal notices to every vendor about authorized contacts. The florist confirmed someone tried to cancel the deposit, but called to verify after something felt off. When I told my mother, she sighed and asked if I was sure this wasn't just a misunderstanding. That was the moment something broke. I said, slowly and clearly, "Do you think I would make this up?" She went quiet. Said she didn't know. I hung up. Ethan held me that night without saying anything, and that was what I needed, silence that felt like safety, not accusation. The next morning, I dug out old journals, texts, and photos, trying to remind myself that this pattern had always existed, that Sophia didn't just flip a switch and turn cruel after I got engaged. She had always needed to be on top, and when she wasn't, she dismantled whoever stood closest. I started reaching out to people from our past, a middle school friend, a former teacher, even one of Sophia's old friends who drifted after college. Each one shared a story. One remembered how Sophia lied in 6th grade and told everyone I had cheated on a math test. Another said she once overheard Sophia laughing about making me cry at a family picnic. The old friend from college said Sophia had once blocked someone on my behalf, then told me they never wanted to talk to me, a favor she turned into a manipulation. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater and watching the whole thing unravel. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was remembering, clearly, what I had spent years trying to soften. I compiled everything into a single folder, labeled plainly, the pattern. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, share it, keep it, or burn it, but for once, I wasn't relying on memory alone. That weekend, I got an email from a mutual friend, a gentle one, someone who had known us both since childhood, asking if I would consider talking to Sophia privately, just to see if this can be salvaged. I wrote back with a single sentence, "You don't salvage what's still trying to sink you." Ethan printed the email and taped it to the inside of a kitchen cabinet. A reminder. Days blurred. Sophia kept escalating. A new Instagram reel using an old family video, me sitting quietly in the corner at a birthday party while she held court in the center, layered with the caption "Some of us were born to shine. Others just observe." Her followers laughed. One cousin commented with laughing emojis. I didn't cry. I just added it to the file. The part that stung most wasn't what she said, it was how easy it was for others to laugh along. How many people in our family, in our circles, had always found her cruelty entertaining because it wasn't aimed at them. And now that I was standing up, setting boundaries, they called it conflict. They called it drama. But I called it enough. The last straw came quietly. A letter slipped under our door, no return address, just a single sheet of paper. Typed. Cold. It read, "If you keep pushing people away, don't be surprised when no one shows up." I stared at it for a long time. I knew it was her. The cadence, the message, it had her fingerprints all over it. I didn't shred it. I didn't throw it away. I took a photo and added it to the folder. Then I walked to the bookshelf and pulled down the wedding invitation box. One by one, I began pulling out envelopes. Names. Guests. Families. I was done pretending. I sat beside Ethan and we began revising the guest list, not just to remove Sophia's friends, but anyone who had enabled her, laughed at her cruelty, or made me feel smaller just to avoid discomfort. It was our day. Our boundary. And she could rage in the shadows if she wanted. I wouldn't be dragged back into them. Not again. It started with a photo. Not a dramatic one, not scandalous or incriminating, just a picture I found wedged in the back of an old photo album, buried beneath childhood birthday cards and school certificates. It was from a family barbecue I barely remembered, and in it, Sophia stood front and center, mouth wide mid-laugh, arms outstretched like she was presenting something. I was in the background, slightly out of focus, holding a plate and looking not at the camera, but at her. I stared at that photo for a long time, realizing with a clarity that felt both painful and clean, even in our memories, I'd been cast as the supporting character. And I had let that happen. Or rather, I hadn't known I was allowed to resist it. That picture became the first page of a new subfolder in my document archive. I called it Evidence of Erasure. I started collecting more. Not just screenshots and messages, but stories, people's memories, quotes, timelines. I reached out to an old neighbor who used to babysit us and asked her bluntly, "Did you ever notice anything off between us?" She hesitated at first, then admitted she always thought it was strange how Sophia would volunteer to be the one to translate my feelings, to speak for me, even when I was standing right there. "You were quiet," she said. "But not confused. She made it seem like you didn't know how to exist without her." That sentence sat with me like a needle under the skin. I started recording voice memos, late at night, cataloging incidents I didn't have proof for but still remembered viscerally. The time she flushed a letter I got from a boy down the toilet. The time she told our cousins I got sent to therapy because I was obsessed with knives when in truth I had confided in her about having anxiety. The time she stole my notebook and read my private poems out loud to friends while I hid in the hallway listening to them laugh. I began connecting the dots between these events and how people had always seen me, timid, awkward, someone who didn't speak up much. But maybe I'd never been given the chance to speak without being translated through Sophia's voice first. Ethan noticed I was sleeping less, thinking more. He didn't push. He just made space for the unraveling. One night, I told him I was considering making everything public. Not for revenge, not even really for justice, but because I needed the truth to be seen. Ethan asked, "By who?" I didn't answer at first. Eventually, I said, "By me." Because I had lived so long inside her version of me that I barely knew where she ended, and I began. Making the truth visible was a way of carving myself out from that mess. So I started building a document, not like a legal brief, but like a map, tracing not just what she had done, but how it had changed me, how it had impacted my relationships, my self-worth, the way I entered rooms already expecting to be overlooked. I listed moments where I had chosen silence over self-respect, comfort over clarity. I dug through old group messages and emails, pulling receipts. I found one from college, a time when Sophia told one of my friends I couldn't come to a party because I had social issues, even though she knew I had already RSVP'd. Another from when she emailed my professor pretending to be me to ask for an extension, which led to an embarrassing clarification later. I showed these to my therapist, who had been helping me sort through the boundaries I was trying to build. She said something I hadn't considered: "Sophia created a role for you and punished you when you tried to step out of it." It clicked. That was the thread. The longest thread. I had been typecast in her life as the background noise, the emotional sponge, the quiet counterbalance to her fire. And when I finally stepped out of that role, when I found love, independence, joy, it didn't just offend her. It destabilized the world she had created. She needed me to stay small so she could feel big. The second I didn't, she didn't know who she was anymore. I reached out to one of her ex-friends from college, someone she had cut off after they betrayed her. I asked cautiously if she had ever experienced anything similar. The girl laughed. "Oh, you mean Sophia's main character syndrome?" She told me stories. About how Sophia once doctored a text thread to make herself look like the victim in an argument. About how she would spread gossip disguised as concern. About how she cried when someone else got engaged before her. "She always needs a villain," the girl said. "And when you're not giving her one, she creates it." I added her testimony to the file. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt grounded. Like the wind was finally dying down after years of walking through a storm with no name. I showed Ethan the completed archive one night over tea. He read through it slowly, stopping every so often to shake his head or rub his eyes. When he was done, he looked at me and said, This is more than just your story. This is a pattern people should know about." I didn't know if I was ready for that step. I wasn't trying to go viral. I wasn't trying to ruin her life. I just wanted my life back. I wanted the wedding to be a celebration, not a battlefield. I wanted to stop flinching every time my phone buzzed. I wanted to stop rehearsing conversations with my sister in my head that would never happen in real life. I wanted peace, not silence, but actual peace. The kind where you get to wake up and not wonder what version of you someone else is constructing behind your back. The kind where you can look in the mirror and see yourself without her shadow leaning in. I didn't know if it was possible. But I knew I had to try. Because the truth wasn't heavy. It was light. It was what let me finally see the weight I'd been carrying all along wasn't mine to hold. I sent it on a Tuesday morning, not because there was anything special about that day, but because the sky was clear and I wanted the truth to land in a moment without excuses. No holidays, no birthdays, no built-in distractions, just an empty weekday with nothing to shield from impact. The email was titled "A Letter to My Family, Please Read." Inside, I attached the archive, the timelines, the screenshots, the quotes, the patterns. But before all that, I wrote a letter. Not emotional, not angry. Calm. Measured. A voice they had never truly heard because Sophia's was always louder. I explained what had been happening for years. I wrote about growing up in the shadow of someone whose charm worked like a spell, not just on strangers, but on family, on friends, on anyone who didn't want to look too closely. I described the quiet violence of being dismissed as sensitive, the way my concerns were always brushed off as jealousy, or weakness, or overreaction. I explained that this wasn't about one moment or one wedding, but about a lifetime of being targeted, then gaslit into silence. I didn't ask for sympathy. I asked for recognition. I ended the letter by saying that while I couldn't control their responses, I could control my proximity. And from that point on, I would only be keeping close the people who made me feel safe, not small. I hit send and closed the laptop. I didn't wait by my inbox. I didn't hover. I went for a walk with Ethan, hand in hand, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in weeks. The responses trickled in slowly. One cousin replied with a voice note, tearful, saying she had always noticed something was wrong but hadn't wanted to get involved. Another message to apologize for laughing at jokes Sophia made in front of her, for not realizing they were just the tip of something deeper. A few relatives didn't say anything, but I saw them unfollow Sophia online within the hour. My aunt, the one who hosted my bridal shower, called and said she was proud of me. It's not easy to call something what it is when it wears a mask, she said. And then there were my parents. They didn't respond for 3 days. When the email finally came, it was from my mother. She said she had read everything. She said she hadn't known how bad it was. Then she said something I didn't expect. I think part of me did know. But I didn't want to see it. And I'm sorry. My father didn't email. He called. His voice was tight, like he was forcing it through gritted teeth. You've always been strong, he said. Even when I didn't see it. You deserved better from us. I didn't cry. I felt. Still. Like the wind had finally dropped. Sophia, of course, reacted exactly how I expected. Within hours of my email reaching the family, she posted a tearful TikTok, makeup perfect, lighting soft, talking about being blindsided by betrayal. She said she had been dragged through the mud by someone she once loved, that she was tired of people twisting the past. She didn't mention my name, but again, she didn't have to. The comments were a split battlefield. Some defended her. Some called her out. And for the first time, the tide didn't fully land in her favor. Someone even commented, maybe you should apologize instead of performing. I saved that one. A quiet trophy. Then came the direct message. Short. Unapologetic. You really think you've won, don't you? I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The difference now was that everyone else could see the shape of what I'd been carrying. The curtain had been pulled back. And with that came something even more unexpected, peace. Not the artificial kind that comes from avoidance, but the real kind, earned through exposure. I went back through my wedding plans with fresh eyes. No more bracing for sabotage, no more second-guessing vendors, no more whispering around the truth. Ethan and I resent our invitations with a revised list, pared down to those who had stood beside us, who had made space for our boundaries. Some declined quietly. Some never responded. But those who remained? They were solid. Present. Not performative. The wedding planner even said she noticed a shift. You seem lighter, she said. And I was. The chaos had receded. The storm had broken. And what was left was something I hadn't felt in a long time, the freedom to be seen fully, not as someone's quieter shadow, not as a joke or an afterthought, but as someone real, someone with her own voice, her own story, her own name. The morning of the wedding felt like standing in a room that had finally been emptied of ghosts, still, echoing, but clean. The silence wasn't ominous. It was earned. There were no last-minute crises, no sabotaged vendors, no passive-aggressive texts disguised as apologies. Just light streaming through the windows, the scent of flowers I had chosen myself, and people who had chosen to be there, not out of obligation, but because they believed in something better than family myths. The venue was tucked against the edge of a wooded clearing, small but full of warmth. Ethan and I had rewritten the guest list until it felt like home, until it no longer included people who confused keeping the peace with ignoring pain. The empty seats didn't feel like losses. They felt like clarity. I stood in front of the mirror in my gown, soft ivory, no corset, just movement and grace, and didn't think of her. Not at first. I thought of Ethan, of how his hands held me like I wasn't fragile, just precious. I thought of the moment he first looked at me across that sociology class and saw me without needing to fix or flatten me. And then, yes, I did think of her, not as an intrusion, but as a shadow I had finally stepped out from. My maid of honor, a college friend who had seen me through the worst of it, adjusted my veil and whispered, "You did it. You got here clean?" And I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I knew now that perfection had never been the point. The ceremony was quiet, deliberate. Every word mattered. My vows weren't about fairy tales, they were about truth, survival, about choosing softness even when the world tries to harden you. Ethan's vows left my knees weak. He spoke of how strength isn't loud, how love can be quiet and still powerful, how healing isn't about erasing the past but choosing not to let it lead the future. People cried. Not from spectacle, but resonance. We kissed. We danced. We clinked glasses. And through it all, I never once had to flinch at the sound of a familiar laugh behind me. The absence of Sophia was a quiet presence in itself, a space that could have been filled with noise, but wasn't. And that was a gift. During the reception, someone mentioned seeing her near the venue earlier in the day, parked across the street, sitting in her car alone. They said she stayed for about 20 minutes, then left. They didn't offer judgment. They just wanted me to know. I nodded, thanked them, and excused myself. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I simply walked to the edge of the dance floor, watched my guests laughing and talking, and let it settle. She had been close enough to disrupt it, but chose not to. Or maybe didn't dare. Either way, she had finally learned what I had to teach her. This wasn't her story anymore. That night, I made a toast. Not a formal one. Not to the room. But to the mirror in the bridal suite while I took off my earrings. I looked at myself, really looked, and whispered, "You made it out." Because I had. I had made it out of a dynamic that had defined me for far too long. I had rewritten the script. I had pulled the longest thread and watched the false narrative unravel. Sophia would always be Sophia. But I was no longer the one she got to perform against. I was no longer the supporting character in her drama. I was the author of my own piece. Ethan came in, barefoot, holding 2 pieces of leftover cake. "How does it feel?" he asked. I took a bite and said, "Like the beginning." He smiled and said, "Then let's keep going." Later, someone sent me a blurry photo. Sophia outside the venue, standing by the entrance, eyes puffy, arms crossed. Watching. Not moving. I stared at the photo for a while, then deleted it. I didn't need to keep souvenirs of pain. I had already kept it long enough. I didn't need proof of a regret. I needed air, light, space. The wedding ended without spectacle. No confrontations. No grand scenes. Just people who loved us, laughing and dancing under string lights and stars. And when we drove away, Ethan's hand on mine, the night quiet and full of the kind of stillness you only get after surviving a storm, I felt something I had never felt before with my family, complete. Not because I had forced closure, but because I had stopped looking for it in places where it had never existed. The final gift she gave me, unintentionally, was the freedom to live without her voice in my head. And that was enough. 3 months passed before I heard from her again, though of course it wasn't a phone call or an apology, it was a letter. A thick envelope with no return address, but I knew her handwriting before I even turned it over. I stood at the mailbox for a long time, holding it like it might bite. When I finally opened it, I found 12 pages, typed, single-spaced, printed on that smooth paper she used for school essays she wanted to be taken seriously. The tone wasn't angry, not overtly. It was careful. Crafted. A familiar mix of self-pity and subtle blame. She called it a clarification. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me, that her jokes were just coping, that her behavior was misinterpreted, that I had always been hypersensitive, that I was rewriting things to make myself feel like the hero. She never said sorry. Not once. Not sincerely. The only apology was sandwiched between explanations, like a concession for optics, not for healing. She wrote about feeling replaced, abandoned, like the world chose me over her. She said she wasn't invited to the wedding because I needed to punish someone. She said she hoped I was happy now, like joy was something I had stolen from her. I read it twice. Then I folded it slowly, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the back of my desk drawer, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. And that was new. Her words used to dictate my temperature. Now they were just ink. That same night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter of my own, not to her, but to myself. I addressed it to the girl I had been at 13, sitting on her bed after Sophia told the entire school she had a crush on a teacher, crying quietly into her sleeve. I wrote to the version of me who stayed silent while Sophia mocked her acne, her weight, her voice. I wrote to the woman who had shrunk herself to avoid being called dramatic, who had let just joking become a shield for cruelty. I told her, "You were never wrong to feel hurt. You were just surrounded by people who didn't want to believe the hurt existed." I sealed the letter, wrote for the one who stayed on the front, and placed it in the same drawer. Not beside Sophia's, but on top of it. Because this was the letter that mattered. The next day, I packed up the wedding folder, all the evidence, the timelines, the screenshots, the guest list edits, the archive of messages. I put it in a box and labeled it memory, not weight. It didn't need to be destroyed, just put away. Not everything painful needs to be burned. Some things just need to be seen and then shelved, acknowledged but not carried. I placed the box on the top shelf of our closet, beside Ethan's college yearbooks. When I closed the door, it stayed closed. Life moved forward without fanfare. No dramatic reunions. No perfect healing arcs. Just breath. Space. A clean rhythm. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since high school, when Sophia told me my art looked like a child's. I didn't paint for Instagram. I didn't even paint to be good. I painted because the colors felt like mine. Ethan and I adopted a dog. We named her Olive. She curled beside me on the couch every night like she'd always been there. We traveled to a small island off the coast for our delayed honeymoon, and I didn't post a single photo. I didn't need to prove anything. And that, more than anything, felt like the real ending, not a confrontation, not a breakdown, but a quiet life where nothing had to be performed. Occasionally, I'd hear from someone who had seen Sophia, At a reunion, at a friend's wedding, at a cafe. They'd say she seemed fine. That she still made people laugh. That she was still the loudest voice in the room. I always nodded, said nothing. Let them think whatever they needed to think. Let her be whoever she needed to be, out there, in other rooms, with other people. I didn't need to chase reconciliation, or revenge, or even recognition anymore. The last word had never been hers. It had always been mine, I had just finally chosen to speak it. And it wasn't forgive, and it wasn't forget. It was enough. Enough lies. Enough minimizing. Enough silence. Enough of making myself small to accommodate someone else's comfort. And the thing about enough is that it doesn't echo. It ends. It lands. It liberates. So when I look back now, I don't see her. I see me. Standing at the edge of the life I was always meant to live. One where my voice isn't something to defend, it's just mine. Heard. Whole. And finally, free.